I'm Chris McDonough, a retired homicide detective. I've interviewed thousands of people, from serial killers to ministers. Welcome to the interview room. Tonight's guest is an amazing friend of mine. You love cop stories? Well, you've come to the right channel. If you don't, I suggest you go to another one, because we're going to tell some really cool stuff from my dear friend. Welcome to all of our TIR members. We're grateful for each of you. To our subs, our Patreon members, our TIR family, we love you guys. And as always, we can't do any of this without our amazing mods, Miss Sophia, Maui Girl, Mimi J2, Teresa Mulligan, and Stephanie Herb. We love you guys. So grateful. Man, I have a guest for us tonight. A dear friend of mine who has been there, done that. Bob Pence, retired from the FBI. Bob was in the South during the civil rights unrest in the 60s. He was trained in Cantonese Chinese for works and assignments in New York City. He's responsible for security of the FBI headquarters and FBI property throughout the world in his career. He helped thwart bank robberies, drug dealers, motorcycle gangs, and others. And he helped shut down the polluted and controversial Rocky Flats nuclear site in Colorado that produced nuclear triggers for nuclear bombs. That's who our guest is here tonight. Bob was born in Pennsylvania, in Brookville, Pennsylvania, and graduated Dixon College in Carlisle in 1960, and then he was an infantry officer. During his 30 years with the FBI, he held a number of supervisory and executive positions, retiring in 1992 as a special agent in charge of the FBI office of the Rocky Mountain states with headquarters in Denver, Colorado. He worked with the iconic director J. Edgar Hoover. Bob's service extended throughout the Americas and during the most tumultuous years, including the civil rights protests of the 60s and the Vietnam War, and into the struggles of the 1970s. Since his retirement, he's been active as a law enforcement, media, and corporate security consultant and travels worldwide throughout the U.S. and abroad. He has served on a variety of charity foundations and law enforcement boards, councils, committees, and Bob co-chairs the Technical Assistance Committee for the Colorado Association of Chiefs of Police and has represented Colorado on the Federal Advisory Committee on Juvenile Justice, who advises the President of the United States and the U.S. Department of Justice and Congress on juvenile issues. Folks, let's show some love from my buddy, Mr. Bob Pence. Robert, welcome to the show, Bob.
Thank you, Chris. Great to be with you.
I am so excited about tonight's show. I really am, because when we spoke, you tell the story. How many times have people come to you and said, "Bob, you need to write a book"? Okay. And I can't tell you how many times I heard you say before this, no, not really interested. So you wrote a new book, and I'm holding a copy of it here, and I'm honored to have a copy of it, called "My Non-Political FBI: From Hoover to a Violent America." It's available now in the link and the description below, everybody, while we go through this tonight. So if you want to go check it out, please click on that. It goes directly to his publisher, and you can order it right from there. But so what changed your mind, Bob?
What changed my mind?
About writing this book?
Well, I'll tell you why I wrote the book. As you mentioned in the intro, one of the reasons was to offer all those folks who came up after my speeches and said, "Hey, you should write a book," or "Where's the book?" Here's the book. That's for them. Well, in a wider sense, I was lucky. I had a publisher who heard that I had a lot of stories, and he became a friend, and he kept after me to write a book. And I'd been traveling a lot. I flew a lot, probably in an airplane more than I was home. And I wanted to write the book for that reason, but something happened along the way that really bothered me. So the book is also written for another reason. I think when J. Edgar Hoover took over the FBI in 1924, he took it over under the conditions that no more political hacks would be FBI agents, or in those days, they were Bureau of Investigation agents. It wasn't the FBI. He said they would have to be college graduates, and they would not be political hacks. He got the job. He was appointed and approved to take over the FBI in 1924. And I have to tell you, in my 30 years with the FBI, I can honestly say that at no time did I ever initiate an investigation or be aware of an investigation that was politically motivated. We always followed the guidelines. The Attorney General guidelines are always based on a dedication to the U.S. Constitution. It seems to the run-up to the 2016 presidential election, we're finding out that it's possible, and I am not involved in it, so I don't know for sure, but under investigation now is the possibility that a small group of FBI agents might have stepped over that political line that Mr. Hoover was deadly against and got involved in some politics. And some of the results, it's being investigated by a special counsel, and some of the results are coming out now. So the reason, I have to thank the pandemic that we're experiencing only for one thing. That publisher called me back after he heard about the pandemic and experienced that nobody was flying and all my speeches were being rescheduled, canceled. He said pretty much, "Bob," he said, "I doubt if you're flying much now, so why can't you write this book?" And so thanks to the pandemic, the year of the pandemic, 2020, I spent from morning till night almost the whole year fact finding and researching, and finally got the book. But what I'd like to add is it doesn't include just some of those adventures or some of those funny and some sad stories. But he said, you put everything in that book that you want to say about your career, about how you got along with other agencies. And it put in there also anything that bothered you. What are your concerns about this world right now? What are your concerns about this violence? So I have to tell you, there's a lot of information in the book, and it involves how the FBI gets along with the military, how the FBI gets along with the press, how the FBI has changed from the days of J. Edgar Hoover in the way of communications, personnel, what different kind of people do we have right now? And more important, how we changed our investigations. And then what I'm really getting a lot of feedback about, the last few chapters that deal with what I think has been causing this incredible rate of violence in our country. So, Chris, the answer to that question is all of that. That's why I wrote that book.
Well, I am grateful that you did, my friend, because, man, the timing of it is absolutely perfect for this country today. I mean, look at yesterday. I mean, we had this massive shooting up in upstate New York, and what's driving that hate, right? And so, in your book, you walk through your career, though, in at the FBI with from some of the most tumultuous and challenging times. I mean, during the civil rights movement, the Vietnam unrest, here in the U.S. anyway. And by the way, we have a worldwide audience who absolutely are some of the most amazing people. They're really brilliant and bright. We have a really good, you know, um, mix of opinions that come into the chat over here. So, but you highlighted many memorable experiences, both on duty and off duty. But I want to ask you, what was your most memorable experience, and why?
I would say memorable experience would go beyond maybe a specific case. I think I'll tell you two of the most dramatic times of my career, and it had to do with different types of things, but probably the most memorable, the two challenges, the most stress that I experienced in a 30-year career happened near the beginning, and you gave it a slight hint to it there with the civil rights movement. I think when I came in the Bureau and I left the U.S. military, I was a infantry company commander. But when I left, it was the time that missiles were heading toward Cuba, and the United States didn't like that idea. But something else was going on inside the United States, and civil rights bills were being passed in the 60s, the early 60s, as I was coming in. And Mr. Hoover, in order to be sure that there were no biased agents, because the FBI has a responsibility for investigating civil rights. So I thought, coming from Pennsylvania, I was delighted to be assigned to the New Orleans division, which I had never been to Louisiana. And New Orleans, a very exciting city. And I thought that was just a luck of the draw. I kind of found out a little bit later that it maybe wasn't. I found out that Mr. Hoover thought, and wisely, that in order to be sure that nobody would accuse FBI agents who lived in the South of being biased in our civil rights violations, he went to the director or the assistant director of our training division and said, just to be sure, let's look at agents coming out of this training class, maybe the next training class. And if they're from the North, let's send them south so that nobody could say that our Southern agents had any bias. So I got to New Orleans, and I was able to investigate criminal activities in New Orleans, which there were plenty because of the attraction and just a very cosmopolitan area with a lot of traffic and a lot of action in the French Quarter. So we had a lot of fugitives and a lot of criminal activity. But I was single at the time, and I also was sent almost every night or every weekend into what was becoming a battle against the white-robed KKK people up in Mississippi, because the New Orleans office covered all of Mississippi as well as Louisiana. So I ended up, and since voting rights acts had been passed, I had to carry in my bureau vehicle, every time I went to Mississippi, a huge camera that went from the front window of the car all the way to the back window.
Wow.
And one of my jobs, every time I entered Mississippi, was to stop at a county clerk's office and photograph all of the voting records. The purpose, of course, was to determine who had the right to vote and who did not have the right to vote. So we were working pretty much the new civil rights laws, and we were not welcome too much in the state of Mississippi. They called us the Federal Bureau of Integration. You could feel it in the restaurants and the hotels. Frequently, law enforcement was infiltrated by members of the Klan. We were in a battle with the Klan. I understand one of the agents who resided there, wife came out one morning, opened her mailbox, and there was a big fat rattlesnake in there. We were really in a battle with the Klan to enforce those laws. So I remember many times I needed to know where a specific address post office box was, and we couldn't even get that information from the postal people. Postmasters would not tell us where post office box 20 was. So we had to tell Mr. Hoover back in Washington that we weren't getting a lot of cooperation from even law enforcement in the South. And he went to the Attorney General, who was Bobby Kennedy. Some listeners may remember Mr. Kennedy. And Mr. Kennedy went to the Postmaster General, and things changed so that we were beginning to get cooperation from the postal people. But it was a very tough, stressful battle. But I have to say that what the FBI did in the battle to get everyone the right to vote in the South, and it's not perfect and it's not all over yet, but at least the vote came to our citizens. And I think that's one area that I was involved in that I believe the FBI really should have gotten a lot of credit, and even in history, they should be getting it. That was one of the stressful times. I'll talk briefly about the other one because it was very stressful, and that was the Vietnam War. It was a very unpopular war. We had riots. We had numerous investigations about anti-riot law violations, and we had the cooperation. Mr. Hoover was still alive. He passed away in 1972, but those years starting in the late 60s and going into the early 70s, in the Vietnam War, frankly, I was concerned that at some point we might have to bring in the military, which of course are not allowed to engage in domestic activities. But there were times there when I thought this country might be feeling a little bit of anarchy, that government was really in trouble. It was a thankless war. Our troops were not appreciated for what they did when they came home. Anyway, we worked like 17, 18 hours a day because the results of what happened the night before all over this country had to be on the desk of Mr. Hoover by like 7 a.m. when he got in every morning. So I was directed, I was changed, I was reassigned. I had gone to Washington to work espionage cases, and I was redirected to work the anti-war riot type cases. And it almost exhausted all of us. But
speaking of Hoover real fast, right? I mean, he was from 62 to 92. You worked, at the Bureau, and he was a director for almost an astonishing 50 years, if I remember right.
Yeah,
right?
close. in the late 40 years. Yeah, he almost made 50, and he certainly died with his boots on, peacefully during the night. And
Right.
I might talk about his early days when he first took over and
Yeah.
agreed.
What was it like to work for him? I mean, you worked under him for almost a decade. What was that like?
It was stressful, but I have to tell you, it was fair. I don't. Discipline for Mr. Hoover came very quickly. Somebody could be transferred overnight and had to be in another city by the weekend. Uh, he was not. Well, the big phrase was, "Don't embarrass the bureau. Don't embarrass the FBI." The FBI was supposed to be doing what it was doing according to the Constitution, and he did not appreciate anyone who fell out of that line. So discipline could be fast and could be severe. But on the other hand, he was with people who needed help, medical, any type of family problems. He could be very generous. So I have to say, it wasn't always fun to work for J. Edgar Hoover. It wasn't fun much at the time, but it was fair. He had his, well, for example, he thought that agents, if they had sweaty palms, the agent might not have the great heart for the job. He didn't like sweaty palms. And I have to tell you, this is a side story. When we graduated from the academy, we met Mr. Hoover for the first time in his office. And we had two counselors, and they were experienced agents. And how we graduated and whether we got any unfavorable comments from Mr. Hoover could depend a lot on whether their career was going to go anywhere. So the fact that they didn't want any sweaty palms had us line up, and our counselors, the two of them, squirted talcum powder on our hands, and we had to rub our hands together so that when we met Mr. Hoover, there was nary a sweaty palm in the house.
That's what was that all about? I mean, why was he that quirky? What was your read on that?
It was just anything had to be exact. Agents could get censured. We produced a lot of paper, particularly during that war I just mentioned, the Vietnam War. And that paper was prepared to go to the highest levels of government. It went to the White House. It went to all the military leaders. It went to the CIA and all of the agencies. He did not want one typo in that communication. And he had a whole office of experienced ladies who were experts in the English language. And all the paper that we produced had to go through their office, and they read it very minutely. And if anything was caught in there, an agent who prepared that communication could get censured and have a letter put into his file. So everything had to be exact with Mr. Hoover. You didn't make a lot of mistakes, and you had to be careful that everything did not embarrass the FBI.
You know, in your book, you talk about the special file room that required special access. And that was the room where they kept files on celebrities, politicians, controversial figures, communists, etc. Back in, at that time during, espionage and all the things that were going on. Occasionally, though, you had reasons to go into that room and check those files. But tell our audience what that was all about, if you can, or what that was like to go into.
Well, that's correct. He did have special files, and these files, when the FBI initiates an investigation, you have to have a good, sound reason for that. It has to be according to Attorney General policies and the law. The FBI has responsibility for over 200 violations, and they're all very specific. But the FBI gets a lot of information from tips and callers, and agents will pick up information. In order to keep people from going through files like that where there was no actual investigation conducted, he had types of information that you didn't have access to because he didn't want people going through those files just for curious, just for seeking information that had nothing to do with any investigation that they were working. So it had a reason. Sometimes something would come up. I had a reason to go. I got permission. I could go through the files. And there was information in there on people, but it was just information that nobody really needed to see because it did not initiate an investigation.
Right. Interesting. Of the thousands of cases that you've worked, Bob, what's been your top 2 or 3 that were the most memorable, and why?
Well, I think one of the cases certainly would have to be the investigation where we had information that there might be leakage of poisonous material out of the Rocky Flats facility. That was a major facility. It had thousands of people working there. It was like a city unto itself. And although it had been essentially closing down, there was still some information and allegations that material was leaking or was being forced out of the facility, maybe through pipes. And we thought maybe even out of smoke pipes. So we did flyovers once the information came to us. The investigation was initiated, and they did flyovers. I don't believe that we detected a lot of poisonous information coming out of those towers, but we did find information coming out of pipes and other things into water supplies in the vicinity. So I thought the FBI was going to be tied up on that search warrant for a few days or a week. We had control of the Rocky Flats nuclear facility for almost a month. It was the longest search warrant, maybe one of the longest in FBI history. But having that responsibility, we had to have control of it, and we had to be careful how we got into it, because the guards at that facility are heavily armed, even with rockets. So we had to devise an entry that wouldn't put us in combat with the security at Rocky Flats. And we did that through setting up, we were going to have a conference about how to protect the facility from terrorists and that type of information. So we got in peacefully, and then we had to take it over for the month, and we had to provide meals we had 24-hour security of it. So that was probably one of the most memorable, and I think it resulted from what we found and the charges brought. I think at the time it was probably the largest fine, something like $18 million, something high at the time that we finished our search warrant and brought charges against the facility for leaking that type of information. That was certainly one of the most memorable of my career.
So for folks who don't know what Rocky Flats is, bring everybody up to speed. What exactly is that facility?
Rocky Flats, which is now, there's a small portion of it now that kind of occupies where they buried all the nuclear poisonous material. And that's all chained off, walked off, and protected. And the rest of it has become a reserve. It was reverted back to the to nature, I forget the name of the facility that has it now, but it's a nature reserve. But what it was sort of a one-of-a-kind manufacturing facility for the plutonium triggers for all of America's nuclear weapons. A very critical facility, very highly guarded, and it in stages became closed. And after we were finished, it closed finally.
Yeah, I mean that facility is was responsible for making all the nuclear triggers, and they had a whole bunch of problems, leakage, obviously, that you guys came in and resolved, and you had to act counterintuitive to all the security measures that you just laid out there. I mean, guys there with rockets, and how did you get around that? What was going through your mind?
Well, that was one of our initially. Of course, that was our top concern. How do we get in there without causing a war? And we were able to do it.
Literally.
We were able to do it through the liaison. The case agent was very innovative, and while while the United States attorney, who was going to be the prosecutor for this, and I were actually in the governor's office briefing him all of the vehicles. We were working with the environmental protection agents. It was a massive operation. We had a armada and vehicles that had to get in there, and they were way down the road, lined up, waiting. And when we briefed the governor on what we had to do, what was going on, they were having a meeting with the leaders of the facility, planning a conference that would put us in there with them, trying to protect them from possible infiltration of spies and terrorists and that type. So it was a peaceful meeting, and while they were in there, they gave them the paperwork, which was the search warrant, and so it ended up very peacefully.
Awesome. And there was a second. Share everybody the story about the gentleman, bank robber.
When I get
his way.
Sure. When I get transferred from North Carolina to Colorado, we were beginning to experience here in Colorado a bank robber who seemed to be very prolific. It turned out later that he actually had originated in Pennsylvania, but he was here, living here. We didn't know that, of course. We had no idea who he was, but he started robbing banks in a number of states, and it started to be sort of a challenge. I don't know whether he meant to. He was the gentleman bandit. He would walk into the bank and tell the tellers, "Ladies, this is the bank robbery," very gently, very friendly. Put your money on the counter. He did flash a pistol, a silver colored pistol. And initially in his robberies, he was very friendly. He started to get a little tense as he went. And a lot of the media and everyone was asking us, the FBI, what are you doing to stop this robber? Because he was hitting us fairly frequently. So we decided that we would get proactive. One of FBI supervisors in the Denver office was charged with setting up a squad, a team that would figure out who this guy was and how we were going to catch him. So they figured out what days of the week would normally be the day he hit. They figured out what type of bank he would normally hit, normally without a guard, without an armed guard. They figured out a number of things about him, and then we convinced the banking industry to put into those target banks that we thought were the most vulnerable, and there were a lot of them, but the banks cooperated, and they would put mostly off-duty police in the bank, acting as tellers and in the bank, not as guards. They were in there like employees. And we are hoping that we could determine where he was going to hit those then. And we missed a few. But interestingly enough, the first bank that he hit in the state of Colorado was located not far from where I live, actually, in unincorporated Jefferson County, Colorado. And That was the first bank that he hit back about the time that I arrived in Colorado. 50 bank robberies later, the
Wow.
50th bank was the same bank as the first bank that he hit. Only this time, there was an off-duty Denver police officer in there acting as a teller. And as soon as the gentleman parked his bicycle, he came in by bicycle. He used to go by car. He'd steal a car, and then he ran into a car that had a dog in it. So he starts riding bicycles into the bank. So
the dog scared him out of the car?
Yeah, he would park the bike right outside the bank and go in and rob the bank. This time, the police officer said, police, he turned the silver weapon toward him. And before he could get off a shot at the police officer took him down. And as they were carrying him away on the gurney to the nearest hospital, he said, I want you to know, to the nurse, he said, I'm the gentleman bandit, and I robbed 50 banks. And that, I didn't wish for in any way that he would end it that way. I hoped we would get him peacefully. But the plan worked, and the team that we worked on did extremely well. So that was a happy ending, and that took down our gentleman bandit.
Wow. And in that time, it was just a single wheel gun, wasn't it? I mean, the agents were what, a P-38? What were they? Or excuse me, a 38 caliber? What did you guys carry?
Well, most of my career, I carried the 38. Excuse me, I carried the 38. The last few years near the end, I carried the 357 Magnum. Yep. And I was still in the Bureau as we switched over to 9mm. And to tell you the truth, I still felt more comfortable with my 357 Magnum most of the time. Yeah. But I carried the 9mm as a cross draw. So I was carrying two weapons, but I think if I'd had to use it, I probably would have gone to the 357 Magnum. Since that, the Bureau has progressed. They tried a 10mm, and then right now they're back to the 9mm semi-automatic pistol.
Yeah, you watched the whole progression of the weapons in of itself for sure. And okay, so what? Now you shared that one, those two stories, but I kind of brought that one on. So what's another cool, career path? I mean, you were there when women for the first time were hired by the FBI, right?
Yeah, yes, I was.
Talk a little bit about those groundbreaking years. What was that? How was that?
When Mr. Hoover took over the Bureau in 1924, there was like one woman in the BOI, Bureau of Investigation. The FBI didn't get its name until 1935. And interestingly, I'll throw this in there too. When he took over in 1924, the FBI was not armed. The Bureau of Investigation had to work cases, even though they were political hacks, so to speak. They had to work cases, and if they made an arrest, they had to make a citizen's arrest and then go to the U.S. Marshal for the official arrest or to the local police. FBI agents did not get armed until 1934, around the time of John Dillan, Babyface Nelson, and all those notorious bank robbers of the 1930s.
Oh, but wait a minute. I don't think the public knows this. This is the first time I've ever heard this. So you guys, early agents didn't even have guns till 1930 what?
1934, they passed a law that would give the FBI authority to carry weapons and make arrests. Wow. Otherwise, we had to work with the marshals, who were an older agency. And of course, we work well with them to this very day. But getting back to your question on the women, when he took over, there was a woman in the BOI, Lenore Houston, or Houston was her name, and he actually made her a special agent of the BOI. She was not an agent. He made her that, and she stayed for a while, and then she retired. After that, there were no females in the FBI until 1972, when Mr. Hoover passed away. He didn't believe women should be agents. He didn't believe that, well, I don't want to put words in his mouth. I don't know why he necessarily didn't believe it, but he didn't want women, and we had none. When he passed away in 1972, before the end of that year, we had about 10 or 11 women finished the academy, and there were many women wanting to become FBI agents, and as soon as it opened up to them, they started. We now in the Bureau have about 20% special agent females, and they're trying to recruit more. Some of the early ones, I don't think the agents of the day, the male agents, I really don't think they treated them that well. The women had a difficult time. Well, I'll tell you a couple of stories about that. When our females first got in the FBI in 1972, we had to make some changes, obviously, in the training. We had to change a little bit how they would do pull-ups. They couldn't do the dead hang pull-ups. Some of the women had trouble pulling the triggers on the weapons. They've done all the necessary modifications to make that right. But aside from the facilities available to them, they had to change a little bit of the programming. But they came out successful. But maybe the world wasn't ready for them, because frequently I would get calls from a woman agent who said that she was in a such and such airport, and they won't allow her to get on the plane with her weapon. And I would talk to the chief pilot of that particular airline usually, and I would explain to him that the FAA is well aware that FBI agents, women, have the same rights as the males, and that they will get on the plane with their weapons. And then I had some interesting reactions. And we had one pilot or so that would say, "I'm not doing it," and he walked off the plane, and we got a replacement. Another one called and said, "All right, I'll take the woman into the plane as long as I have her bullets up in my lap." And she had a classic response. She said, "That's fine, as long as I'm up there in your lap with them." So anyway, they stood their ground. We got that corrected after a while, but that's just one. Some of the agents thought they should be back in the home with their children or cooking, and they didn't belong. Frequently, when there'd be a bank robbery and everybody'd be leaving, the male agents would be getting the instructions, and the female agents were being left in the office. So a lot of the early female agents weren't happy. I know there was one suit that was successful in getting them much more accepted and getting them the assignments like the men were getting, the robberies, and getting the ability to go out and do everything. It was painful, and it took time. But I tell you now, our women agents are doing everything that the men are. They're in high-level leadership positions. They're in charge of offices, running offices. They're back at headquarters in the top 3 or 4 positions in the FBI headquarters. So I think the way to say it now is that we have men and women agents, and just some of them are women, but they're all FBI agents, and we don't hear a lot of that type of problem now. But it was a struggle.
Yeah, it sounds that way, and so grateful that the times have evolved. and these women agents, rightfully so, and even, women police officers, just, pilots, there's no difference. I mean, I've worked alongside of some of the brightest minds, not only in the courtroom but in the investigative, arena. Who, you know, she just, I can tell you, Sheila Pockenjack, for an example, she just look at me like, seriously, and and she wanted to have a conversation about, why she was going to go the way she was, and I got to be honest with you, she's right. They were right. And my Karen tells me all the time, and my Karen, my Karen, and she says, trust. My instinct is right. I trust it, and I've got to give it to her. 99% again. Uh, she's right. She follows that instinct, and it is never wrong. And that really does make an amazing. It's a gift. It's a gift that women have, and quite frankly, I think more men need to come to the reality that that gift is much brighter than theirs sometimes, including mine. I'll be the first one to tell you that.
Well, I'll tell you the story of how the first female agent that had been exposed in my office, where I was an assistant agent in charge in the Kentucky office in Louisville, and we had a female agent. Now, this was back in this, one of the earlier classes to graduate, and she was having her difficulties too with normally assignments. They were getting the easier assignments that had a lot of paperwork but didn't have a lot of risk. And, and I sort of understand some of the supervisors were trying to protect the female agents, so they were trying to give them assignments that would not expose them to the problems. However, we had an interesting case develop fairly quickly in my first experience with a female agent, and this was a kidnapping that occurred in the southern part of Virginia, right along the Kentucky line. A little girl of kindergarten age was kidnapped by an escaped federal prisoner who was invaded the farm, I believe it was, and took the little girl, kidnapped. He is heavily armed, ended up down in southern part of Kentucky around Lake Cumberland area, if anybody's familiar with that. And the FBI responders in Virginia called us because they had just gotten a call from the kidnapper for ransom. He said, if you want this little girl back, you will go do so-and-so and bring so-and-so. And it was down in the southern part of Kentucky. So our office mobilized quickly. We brought all of our agents in from the offices south of Louisville. And my boss, who was the special agent in charge, flew down to the site. And I went down with lights and sirens. It was about a 150-mile trip, and I was lit up all the way with emergency equipment. We get down, and one of the agents responding from headquarters in Louisville was the female. They were all down there. We were all converging, and the first agents to arrive from one of the offices closer spotted the little girl and the kidnapper walking around the park. And when we had all of our troops in place, we decided that we can't wait because it's going to start to get dark. We've got to make a move. So what they decided to do was to take the female agent and the male agent, put them in a maintenance vehicle, put them in a park uniform, but not a park ranger, not a law enforcement capability. And then once they get back into the bank robbers or the kidnapper's car, they would come up behind them. Female got out on the passenger side, the male got out on the driver's side, They walked up to the kidnapper's car, talking as they went, "Hey, can we help you? Do you need some help?" As they got up there, when the mail agent got beside the driver, he said, "FBI, you're under arrest. Don't move." And as frequently happens, he decided to move. The agent had to gently tap him on the head with his service weapon. But the interesting thing was what the female agent did. Simultaneous with his tapping the bad guy who was reaching in the back seat to get one of his weapons, the female agent dove into the passenger window, grabbed the little girl, had her out kind of in one lightning move, had her on the ground, had her body on top of the little girl. And that was my first experience with an operational case involving one of our female agents. So that case, as I said it in the hotel there with the little girl waiting for the people from Virginia, I learned a lot and I thought about a lot of things. Two of them I'll mention to you. As she was watching cartoons, we waited a few hours, and when the convoy arrived from Virginia, it was the mayor, it was the Virginia State Police, it was the parents, it was the neighbors, it was the school principal. It was almost the whole town was there. They crashed into the door, into the hotel room we were in, and grabbed the little girl. And I thought about two things. One was just how valuable one single little life was. I probably hadn't thought about that before. And two, how valuable our female agents are going to be to us. And the next morning, just before they went back to Virginia, and I was with the little girl, I said, "Do you need anything else? Can we do anything else for you?" And she whispered to me, "Well, while we were walking yesterday through the gift shop, I saw this Daniel Boone coonskin hat. I didn't have to say anything, and the manager of the hotel at the camp there was with us. He didn't have to say anything, but they went back to the gift shop, and she was the new owner of her little coonskin hat, and they were happy campers going back to Virginia. So that was a kidnapping, a severe, serious kidnapping that I learned a lot on, and I hope all of us involved also did.
That's an amazing story, Bob. Thank you so much for sharing that story. In the last couple of chapters of your book that I was skimming through and reading it, you addressed growing violence here in America, and you offer some solutions. You talk about hope, and other things. Let's talk about unpack that a little bit for our audience here. Of what do you see in the future?
Yeah, that's kind of the sad part. I think we're kind of involved in what I like to say, which gets a lot of people's attention right away. We are in a position where we have lost a lot of our liquor. And I say that phonetically because I'm talking about liquor, LCR, love, care, and respect. And I refer to it to my audience as our loss of liquor, but and the book, of course, is a law enforcement book, so I dwell in what we've lost in the way of respect. We've lost the love, we've lost the care, we lost respect. And it's not law enforcement's problem. That's where it ends up. But this is across the board. This is happening from our families, from our communities, from our cities, it's just yeah, you can blame the pandemic and you can blame a lot of things, and we can blame homelessness and we can blame drugs and alcohol and all these things together. But the one that where it really hits the fan is right at the end, and it all is ending up on the backs of our law enforcement. And I tell you, the quote that I really like, back in 1985, I was addressing the graduating class of the North Carolina State Highway Patrol. There are about 50 troopers graduating, and they were going out on the road. And I said, gentlemen, and I remember this because the newspaper reported it the next day. I said, gentlemen, you don't have to worry. You're going to go out there and you're going to get respect just because of the uniform you wear. You're not going to have to pay for it. You're going to give it to you free. And I have to think, sometimes I'm almost in tears when I think, if I had to give that same speech to that same group today, I'd say, gentlemen, be careful out there because that uniform you wear could be putting a target on your back. We have got a problem in our country now, and it's not just the fact that the respect is being lost for the law enforcement people, but we're losing respect kind of for ourselves. A quote that I like to use, and it means more to me every day, is a quote from Carl Sandburg, American poet laureate, born in the late 1800s and died in 1967. One of his quotes, and I really and truly believe it, he said, when a nation goes down or a citizen's civilization perishes, you can find one thing every time. They forgot where they came from. They forgot what brought them along. And I think we're in a period right now where we're forgetting what really brought us along. When we got into this country and the leadership in this country decided that they were going to put in God we trust on all of our money, that we were going to put in God we trust. We even added it to our flag in the salute to our flag back in 1954. 1956, the Congress made it the United States motto, in God we trust. We also are beginning to destroy a lot of the history of what made this country. I don't mean that it always made it good. We've got the Confederate statues that we're destroying. You've got to look at these, I think, in the chapter of history, not because it's an honor of, it may be something that we remember because it was something that we overcame and made things better. And I can think of a lot of the examples if I were doing a seminar I can do on that. But if we don't remember where we came from, if we don't remember Sir Robert Peel, the great English great authority for law enforcement in UK, he said, the police are us and we are the police. And when a lot of the people from that part of the world came into our country, they actually helped law enforcement. Everybody in the shires in England were supposed to be available to come out and help law enforcement. If you were under 80 and you were not sick, you had had to be part of the law enforcement force. When we came over, where do you think the word sheriff gets its meaning, gets its name? We actually had our people, when they first came over to this country, would walk the wall, help the law enforcement secure. And now it's kind of us against them. So law enforcement is really taking a lot of heat right now. And when I say respect, I'm going to say it in one thing that I notice when I review a body cam or a car cam, and an officer makes a stop, and this is almost universal. I'm seeing this in almost every case where it ends up badly. And the officer says something like, please keep your hand on the wheel, or get out of the car, or in other words, show me your hands. He has the authority to do that, and that's reasonable. Every one of these that I'm looking at, the person does not obey the authority. And these are people that have authority for, they can take your life. They've got weapons that take your life. Some of these could be very simple if you just obeyed the command to show me your hand. Don't reach down into your car. Don't reach into your pocket. Anyway, that's the respect that I'm seeing that's not being given to law enforcement. And you know what happens when that happens? We end up in a high-speed chase. We end up in a foot chase. We end up in a physical altercation. Sometimes it ends up with innocent bystanders and pedestrians being killed. This type of respect has got to be enforced. It's got to be reinforced. On the same token, the law enforcement's got to bear in mind that they need to respect the rights of the citizens. But there's a breakdown, kind of simply put, and I don't think I or anyone else really has all the answers to this right now, but that type of respect has got to be reinstituted in our country. And I think if you do that, it's going to lead to the love, the care, and all the other things that we're missing right now. The country is really in bad shape for that. And there is hope. Every time I get so disheartened and just down on the weird things that are happening, and some people will say, yeah, but we've had crime rates worse than this. I don't think we have had the kind of crime that we're seeing now. We're seeing.
And Bob, let's give everybody a perspective here as well, from not only from what you're saying, right? I think you are right on. My personal opinion is, you're right on target. And I mean, the environments that you and I have, been around. I mean, we've been to all the major city chiefs and all the stuff. And I mean, we've watched the president walk right in and give a speech, right? I mean, those are the kind of environments we're seeing or we've been in. And today, though, what's really interesting for me, to listen to you, and I agree with you, I think we've seen a shift, a real shift in the ability to be civil. And I think the social scientists over time are going to study this at length. And they're going to look at this time, and they're going to look back and go, okay, well, how does this correlate to 1933 and 1939? A lot of folks don't know. My wife is a Messianic Jew. She is an Ashkenazi Jew, born 100% DNA, but she converted to Christianity. Her stepdad had a number on his wrist. And I asked many times the question, to family members, because her whole side is, Jewish. And I asked the question, and, of course, I'm the goyim in the family because I'm a Christian. And, I pulled their daughter over, for lack of a better term. But where I'm going with this is this. How did a country of, millions of people, how did they turn on their neighbors? How did they turn on their friends? And if we look at some of the, the historical, events that took place, guys like you who've been there, done that at the highest levels, within this country. To hear you say stuff like this, it for the younger generation, it should be very profound to pay attention, because what you're speaking is truth. And you know what is difficult for people to hear what they define as a piece of truth. And because it's so easy today to say, it's not that I don't agree. I just think, that person's 1,000,000% wrong. And we may be, I may be, you may be, I don't know. I mean, when our grandchildren are going to experience what we've experienced, right? I always tell, classes when I go teach, Homicide 101, and I get a classroom full of cops, I always write up on the board, 58,000 times 10, right? And then I ask them, what does this number represent? And of course, a couple of guys from the Vietnam era get it. They go, well, that's how many troops we lost in Vietnam over a 10-year period. And then I write 18 to 23,000 times 10. And then I multiply it and I write 230. I said, what's this number? And they're stumped. And then I tell them that's the FBI statistic for violent crime and homicide in the United States today. So then I followed up with, so where's the war today? Where is the war? So what you're saying is fascinating. And I didn't mean to interrupt, and I apologize. But so go back to your thought there. I didn't mean to sidetrack you for a second, but I just love listening to your wisdom and what you're saying.
No, and I appreciate your insights there. I was going to say, a lot of people would say, well, we've had crime rates that even worse than we're seeing now. And I just want to say, I think I see a different type of crime. Our officers killed. 1930, we had a high, I think there were 350 police officers killed in the line of duty in the year 1930. That's a high watermark. We've had already in the first month of this year, 2022, we've had 30 officers just in the first month shot, several of them killed, but a lot of them wounded. And that doesn't count the number who were shot at. But the problem, the difference I see, and I see it in all of the incidents that I'm seeing, the difference in the crime rates when they're high, and you see robbers, the John Dillingers killing a lot of people, but the police officers were probably expecting that because, if you will, the enemy sort of was in front of them. It was like an army where the enemy's across from you, it's not behind you. There's a lot of officers being ambushed. We had 2 FBI agents already in just last year, 2021, right at the beginning down in Florida, who were walking up to a porn dealer residence, and they were going to serve a search warrant. That would normally be a low risk type of an operation. So they weren't necessarily backed up by SWAT teams, and they were there to serve a warrant. And they were ambushed, and both of them were killed. And those were our most recent FBI martyrs. But the problem I see today, and I see it in road rage. I see road rage incidents where normally in the old days, in normal times, so to speak, maybe somebody would honk the horn, maybe they'd give them the finger, maybe they'd curse at them, but they didn't necessarily take out an AK-47 and shoot them. We see now cases in New York. I remember one recently where I think they were twin babies were thrown off a high rise into an alley. It's not just New York. It's not just people that are being pushed off the subway platform in New York. It's a situation, I believe, in New Jersey where a mother took her babies, and heavy victims of these homicides today are really young people. These were barely babies, and she put tape over their nose and mouth and suffocated them. We see case in the heartland out in Iowa where a couple young people stalked one of their teachers and shot the teacher. These are not the typical crimes of just a bad crime like a robber doing his thing. These people are being dismembered. People are being attacked with swords and machetes. It's almost like life is becoming too cheap for too many people. Look at the domestic incidents we're having. A lot of those are combined murders and suicides. It's like they don't want any more to do with this world. So I think we have to really look back now and see where we've come. Think of all the people that have come to this country and done so many good things. When I was in New York, I used to ride occasionally with the Coast Guard, and we sometimes would stop at Ellis Island, where 12 million people came into this country from all over the world, and they were productive. They were part of a melting pot, they called it. We don't have the melting pot anymore. We have sort of a tribal almost society around where we've got gang activity, and these gangs are shooting each other, and they're young people with victims. And the way that they're being killed is it's horrendous. But I still have hope, and things are happening. I see every day heroic acts. I saw a video just this morning of a police officer grabbed a guy off of a subway platform just seconds before he would have been killed by the subway. Incident happened back in New York here a few weeks ago, which really gives me hope. A small businessman lost his wallet somewhere in Times Square. Supposedly had $40,000 in it. That was what he opened a business and must have carried his money with him, I guess, from day to day. And he lost it. And he goes back trying to retrace his steps back through Times Square. And suddenly he saw a couple police officers, and they noticed he looked like he was looking for something. They met, and they were somebody had turned in a wallet with $40,000 cash, and he was able to get it back. So we do have great people in this country. We do have a lot of hope.
Yeah,
and I have hope for it, but we've got to recover our liquor.
No. I'm back. Okay, are we back? I think we're back. Sorry about that, Bob.
Okay.
Okay. No, in your book, you talk about a few what I'll call divine interventions or divine hand that reached out to help you, and one was in Warsaw, Poland, where you found yourself stranded, and the other one was in Charleston, South Carolina.
Right.
Can you talk about would you share those two stories? I think they're fascinating stories.
I'd be happy to. And actually, it's a good time because we're talking about hope. And I think alongside some of the things that are happening, and since this has something to do with spiritual, a lot of the things that really trouble me are in that arena that, where we put people brought God into this country and they went to church, and we put it into the Pledge Allegiance to our flag, and but it seems these days they're taking a lot of that out, that they are trying to take God out of all this. And even though our Congress and everyone keeps insisting that that's our motto and we stand by it, a recent example to show what's happening and that we need to look at is a school in New York City, the Collegiate High School, the Prime High School, one of the best prep schools in the country, very expensive to get into. They have suddenly decided, I think it's the students, they've certainly decided their slogan or their motto or their symbol was they were formed in 1628 by New Amsterdam, and they had that in their sign, 1628 AD. They have decided the AD on a Domini, the year of our Lord, is not appropriate in today's society, so they're going to take that out. They also changed their motto, which had something to do with, if it's not God, then it's not real, or it's something about it. If it doesn't have something to do with God, then it's in vain. And they said, that's not right today, so we're going to change that, and we're going to make it friendship, wisdom, 3 adjectives to better describe the mission of the school. So I think that's what we need to watch. I mean, if we're looking back to see what brought us there, maybe it was more of the Christmas stuff rather than the happy holidays. Maybe it was more of the Easter stuff than it was spring egg hunts. Maybe it's the Marines who look at the Marine statue in Arlington and see the 6 Marines who put up the flag over in the big battle where we lost 6,800 Marines. And a lot of people will go by that monument and they will see 13 hands on that monument, and only 6 people, because they believe, and some of them, even though the sculptor says, no, there are only 12 hands on there, there are still people who believe that 13, they see 13 hands and the hand of God is on there. So what happened to me to give me hope a little bit is one of them happened, and none of these are life-threatening, but the one that happened out of country happened a couple years ago. I was going to a European law enforcement conference in Warsaw, and we got in, I believe, on a Sunday. These are leaders of law enforcement from all over Europe, about 300 to 400 of us, and the host, the Polish National Police, picked us up, and before we stopped at our hotel, we were bused out to a special event. It was happening out at a park several miles outside of Warsaw. And so none of us had any chance to change any money. None of us really even knew what the name of the hotel was. So anyway, we get dropped off at the park, and the park is probably a quarter-mile long and has fountains and beautiful statues. And up at a northern level of it, or up a hill, they were having a concert. And it was a concert, a renowned artist, a piano concert. And there were hundreds of people there. And all of us from the bus were up there sitting there. And it lasted a couple hours. And before the end of the concert, I was so impressed with that park. I thought, well, I've seen enough, heard enough of the piano concert. So I'm going to go back down into the other part of the park because that's where the buses are and that's where we got off. I get down to the other end of the park and I walked around the fountains and all the beautiful park. And then I see the concert is over and people are coming down the hill by the hundreds. So I go over to where the buses were, but the buses weren't there. So I thought they must have moved the buses. So I thought, well, maybe I went back up to the top of the hill and the buses weren't there. So I went back and forth and it's getting dark. And so I go back out to the street. I have no idea where I am. I'm in somewhere outside of Warsaw. I go outside the park and nobody speaks English or wants to speak English. They wouldn't, I couldn't get anybody that would communicate. I had no Polish money. I didn't know where the hotel was. I didn't know the name of my law enforcement contact. I was sort of, I was running out of ideas, frankly. I had no idea where I was. And it was a busy avenue with high-speed traffic. Taxis were all occupied. There was nothing would stop for me. And as it got dark, it was almost dark by then. And I frankly didn't know what I was going to do. It was not life or death, but it was a very difficult situation. I had nobody to call. And I stood there and I said, how the heck am I going to get back to this hotel? As I was standing there, and one after I'd gone back and forth across the avenue many times, I suddenly heard a voice behind me. And I turned around and the voice said, can we help you? And there was a gentleman about 50, 60 years old, dressed in a suit, spoke perfect English, had a little boy holding his hand, had to be 7, 8 years old maybe. He didn't say anything. And I tried to explain to this man my predicament. I was embarrassed, but I said that everything. I don't have any money. I don't know where I'm going. He looked at me and he said, follow me. And I had no alternative, so I followed him. We went through some alleys and across a number of avenues. We ended up at a bus or a tram stop. And he said, wait here. He got into his pocket and he pulled out a ticket and he handed it to me. And he said, wait. So a tram came and stopped and he said, no, not this one. Another one came, no, not this one. A third one came, no, not this one. Finally, one came and he said, get on this tram. And after the third stop, pull the chain, pull the rope, and get off the tram and look to your right, and you will see your hotel. I thought that was bizarre. I did. I took the ticket. I took one step up where I had to insert the ticket. Immediately looked around, and the entire ramp for that tram was empty. There was no one there. And I looked up the street, down the street. It was almost dark, and there was no one. And sure enough, after the third stop, when I pulled the chain, I remembered that we got in the buses there quickly, and there was my hotel. So I think about that a lot, and I know what I think, but I mean, people will have to evaluate that in their own senses.
You know, I think that happened. There's no question in my mind. And you know, it's interesting. I call that the thin blue veil.
Yeah.
How many times have, doctors, lawyers, or excuse me, nurses, you know, firefighters, lawyers, sometimes, I'm teasing, the ones that that we love. And, there's just this thin blue veil that is just right there. And, they look out for us. And I mean, soldiers experience it, nurses experience it in combat, in the MASH units, just, they get that impression. And it's like this other side saying, hey, don't do that, or don't go over there. And so tell them about the South Carolina story, and then we're going to take a couple of questions. Are you good with that? And then I'm going
Sure.
to get you out of here in a little bit. I promised I'd get you out of here earlier, but this is so much fun. Keep going.
Well, the Charleston thing was kind of also bizarre. I was going to a law enforcement. This was a state level. These were the state police and an organization that has the state leadership from the United States. This is all U.S. State leaders, troopers, and state investigator. And it was going to be in Charleston. And I wanted to see a friend of mine who used to run the FBI office in Charleston. But I forgot to pack his name, and there was no way, once I was in the air, that I would be able to contact him. So I got to my hotel in Charleston. If you're familiar with Charleston, it's on Meeting Street, which is the kind of the historic main street down through the middle of Charleston. Has a lot of buildings, a lot of churches, a lot of different.
It's called the Holy City. It's called the Holy City.
Yeah, there are about 400 churches in Charleston. And I got out of my hotel on a Sunday, and I was going to go find the hotel where this meeting was going to be, where all the police were going to be. I was down at one end of the Meeting Street, and I started down Meeting Street, and I'd walked about a block or two, and suddenly I look up, and there's a church there.
In South Carolina, by the way. Somebody's asking, West Virginia or South Carolina? It's South Carolina.
South Carolina, Charleston.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. Go ahead.
And I see a church with the broad, beautiful columns, and I thought, well, that's a beautiful church. I kept walking. I walked a couple more blocks, and something told me, go back to that church. So I go back to that church, and I was drawn to it. So I walk up a steep set of steps up to the top step and the entrance to the church. As I walk into the church, standing behind the last pew was the gentleman who I had intended to contact if I'd had his, if I'd had his phone number. He couldn't believe it either. We had a nice chat. I hadn't talked to him in a while. But out of 400 churches in the Holy City, I found him, and it was kind of blew my mind too. Again, not a critical situation, but it's certainly, I thought I had some help with that job.
That's awesome. That's incredible. Okay, so let me grab a couple of a question here. Bob, is your book available on tape? And by the way, if you're just joining with us, this is Bob Pence. He's just released a recent book, My Non-Political FBI, From Hoover to a Violent America. And you can get the book. The link is down below in the description here. So if anybody wants to order it directly through the publisher, I don't know if the publishers put it on Amazon because some folks have been asking, but I don't believe it's available on Amazon yet, is it?
No, it isn't. That's an interesting story. The publisher, as I explained, had been after me to write the book. He was very pleased with it. He said, I read the book 8 times. He said, you got 100 stories here, and you probably got 100 speeches because I do a lot of speaking. And he said, I'm not going to release it to anyone. I said, I'm not going to need to release it to anyone. So awesome. He didn't. And the book now is in its second printing. But anyway, you have to get it through the publisher, either on the website or there's a phone number in the
So the
United
question,
States.
yeah, go
I
ahead.
don't, do you have the phone number, Chris?
I'll get it and I will put it up there. You can text it to me, or if you want to say it right now, go ahead and we'll.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. In the U.S., it's area code 303
Hang on, let me make a banner here, Bob. Hang on, area U.S. Oops, if I can.
It's area code 303
Yep.
277
Yep.
1623.
Okay. Okay, so I have just created this. And I love your clock. There you go. US 303-277-1623 to order the book. Okay, so let me grab a couple more questions here, Bobby. Is the book available on tape, though? Are you going to make it available on tape?
That would be the decision of the publisher. He's pretty pleased with the way it's going. I don't know. I've had a lot of people inquire whether it's going to be an ebook, whether it's going to be on Amazon and that. And so far, he has not felt the need to do that.
Yeah. Okay, so let's see here. You got a lot of great comments here, everybody. Let's show Bob a little love here. I love these comments. Thanks for being here for America. Isn't that a true statement, Bob? I met Bob a long time ago, but we had dinner one time in Virginia, at Williamsport, right?
Yeah, Williamsburg, Virginia.
Williamsburg, and we've kind of run in different circles. He's with the FBI, I was with locals, and we had a lot of friends in common. And when he told me he had written this book, and this was just a couple of months ago, and we were just I was so busy with the other things, and we kind of reconnected, and I told him, I said, the world has to hear your stories, because I don't know about you guys, but if you guys haven't totally enjoyed our good friend here, we've got look at all the comments coming here. What a lovely gentleman. The hearts are coming in for you, Bob. Looks like you're a heartbreaker too. So amazing life, Bob. They love the clock in the background. It's a great Sunday night conversation. Thank you, Mr. Pence. Thank you for your service. Hey, are you related to the Pence, the vice president? Do you get that asked all the time?
Not that I know of. I'm not that I know of, but I'll, if you want to take the time, I'll tell you an interesting story.
Sure, go. Everybody loves an interesting story, especially when you frame it like that.
I don't think he would mind, but a few years ago, right before the pandemic, I was in Helsinki, Finland, and I was there with a law enforcement conference, and the FBI director was there. The U.S. ambassador to Finland was there. The head of all of the Finnish police, with a large conference. And after all the introduction welcomes by all those headliners, I walk up to the head table, and I greeted the FBI director. And then at the U.S. ambassador, I said, "Your Excellency, I'm Bob Pence." And he literally jumped out of his seat and he said, "It's you." He said, "I've been looking for you." His name is Bob Pence. And he said, "You got my email. I wanted the email you got, and you got the email address that I wanted." And he went on. And we've been good friends ever since. So You
This
never
has
know
been-
who you're going to meet and where you're going to meet them.
You just don't know. That's right. You just don't know. And I know you are an amazing American. You've done so many great things, and you've protected this country on so many different levels. You're a rare breed, as I would say, and I've always respected you, and looked up to you, because you also have this calm that you've always had, and I've seen it, for quite some time now, and it's always been a privilege and an honor to call you friend. It really has. And I have a tradition on my program tonight, or on my program. That is to always give the guest the last word. And when I do that at the end, I don't know if I ever shared with you, both of my parents were military in the Marine Corps. My dad, 31 years in the Marine Corps. My mother was a sergeant. And both of my parents are buried in Arlington National Cemetery. And my father fought in 3 wars, Korea, Vietnam, and World War II. And he raised us children. There were, 4 of us, but I lost a little brother when I was younger. And so the 3 of us, to love this country and to love our patriots, those that have done amazing things. And you're one of those guys. You are one of those guys. And so I honor you tonight by giving you the last word with our friends here. And then I'm going to play a song from Hawaii. So you'll just, when you're done speaking, say, have a good night. And then the Hawaii song will come on. And Bob, I can't thank you enough. Folks, if you, for coming on, will you come back? If I invite you back, will you come back in?
Oh, I'd be happy to, Chris. Yeah, I really appreciate you also. You've been a great friend. My last word would be, I'll give you a last word and another quote, and then I will give it back to you. And the last word would be, let's spread more of this liquor. And the last quote is one from a Frenchman. In 1831, and this is in the book because I like it, the French government sent Alexis de Tocqueville over to our country to study the prison system in our country. And he fell in love with the United States. He saw it beautiful in every respect. In 1835, he wrote one of our great treatise, our great authority on democracy in America. And his quote was, "America is great because America is good." And at that point, that America is no longer good, she will no longer be great. So we need to spread that love, care, and respect, and we need to do it quickly. Thank you, sir.
Hard working every day, I'm stressed out 24/7, babe. No timeouts, wish we could fly away. You and I go to our favorite place. Oh yeah, make special memories together. I'll be your company now and forever. I say we fly away, you and me, go to our favorite place. Feeling the sun on my face in Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, Hawaii. With you, taking away, yeah, we're taking away. Don't hesitate now, we're taking away, yeah, we're taking away. We'll never come down, we're going away, yeah, we're going away, you and me. Feeling the sun on my face in a way.